He built a career on silence. A raised eyebrow, a twitch of the mouth, a single sideways glance that said more than a page of dialogue ever could. For decades, audiences around the world have laughed at a man who barely speaks, never quite realizing that the silence itself was born out of pain. Rowan Atkinson, the man behind Mr. Bean, spent his childhood fighting to get words out at all. Now at 70, the actor has become more open than ever about what that struggle actually cost him. And the picture that emerges is far more human and far more complicated than the bumbling character who made him famous. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born on January 6, 1955 in Consett, a small industrial town in County Durham, England. He was the youngest of 4 brothers, though he never knew his eldest sibling, Paul, who died in infancy. Rowan grew up on the family farm, in a household that valued discipline and hard work over performance and attention-seeking, an odd starting point for a boy who would eventually build an empire out of pulling faces. As a young child, Rowan developed a pronounced stutter. It made ordinary conversation exhausting and school, at times, unbearable. He has spoken in later interviews about how difficult it was simply to answer a question in class, how the words would catch in his throat while other children waited, and how that hesitation became something classmates seized on. Being singled out and mocked for the way he spoke left a mark that stayed with him long after the stutter itself eased. What makes Atkinson's story genuinely striking is the pattern he discovered almost by accident. When he stepped into a role, when he became someone else entirely, the stammer disappeared. Performance gave him a kind of vocal freedom that ordinary conversation never could. It's a detail that recontextualizes his entire career. The master of physical comedy may have gravitated towards silence and exaggerated expression not simply because it was funny, but because it was, for him, a form of liberation. Atkinson's academic path gave no obvious hint of what was coming. He excelled in the sciences, earning a degree in electrical and electronic engineering from Newcastle University before continuing his studies at the Queen's College, Oxford, where he pursued a graduate degree. He was, by most accounts, an unremarkable presence in the classroom, quiet, reserved, easy to overlook. Everything changed when he got in front of people. At Oxford, Atkinson threw himself into the university's drama and review scene, where he met a young writer named Richard Curtis, who would go on to become one of his closest collaborators and one of Britain's most successful screenwriters. Curtis has often described the strange transformation he witnessed. An unassuming, softly spoken student who became a different creature entirely the moment he stepped on stage, capable of contorting his face and body into shapes that made rooms erupt. Their partnership took Atkinson to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in the mid-1970s, where his one-man sketches, built around mime, timing, and physical precision rather than rapid-fire dialogue, began to draw real attention. It was an unlikely proving ground for a man who, by his own account, still dreaded unscripted conversation. But it worked. Audiences didn't need him to be a smooth talker. They needed him to be extraordinary to look at. And that he was. Atkinson's early attempts to break into television were rocky. Pitches were rejected, pilots went nowhere, and the pressure of auditions, moments that demanded he be himself rather than a character, brought his stutter back to the surface. For a while, he seriously considered walking away from performing altogether and returning to engineering. The breakthrough came with Not the 9 O'Clock News, a satirical sketch show that premiered in 1979 to a muted response and outright hostility from some critics. One review reportedly called it one of the worst programs ever broadcast. Yet the BBC unusually stuck with it, and by the second series the show had found its voice, propelled by a now legendary ensemble that included Pamela Stephenson, Mel Smith, and Griff Rhys-Jones. It was on this show that Atkinson delivered one of the most quoted sketches in British comedy history, playing an enraged gorilla in a segment that turned him into a household name almost overnight. The show's success came at a price. By 1982, at the peak of its popularity, the cast chose to end it rather than continue. The relentless writing schedule and performance pressure had worn everyone down, and rather than chase another series for the sake of ratings, the team walked away. It's a decision that says something about Atkinson's relationship with fame from the very start. Even early in his career, he seemed to understand that burnout was a real cost of the work, not just an occupational hazard to be ignored. Atkinson's next major project, Blackadder, began shakily. The first series, an ambitious and expensive costume comedy co-created with Richard Curtis, struggled with a lukewarm critical reception and a budget that nearly sank it. Only a surprise international Emmy win kept the concept alive long enough for the BBC to commission a second series, this time with a smaller budget, a sharper comic sensibility, and a new writer, Ben Elton, brought in to tighten the scripts. The gamble paid off. Blackadder 2, and the seasons that followed, transformed Atkinson's cunning, acid-tongued Edmund Blackadder into one of British television's most beloved characters, supported by a cast that included Tony Robinson as the dim-witted Baldric and, later, Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry. The final series, Blackadder Goes Forth, set in the trenches of the First World War, took a considerable risk by blending broad comedy with genuine emotional weight, culminating in a finale so quietly devastating that it's still discussed as one of the most memorable endings in sitcom history. Atkinson has since described that production as one of the least stressful periods of his career, largely because of the trust and improvisational chemistry shared among the cast. Then came the role that would define him globally. Mr. Bean, a character Atkinson had actually been developing since his university days, made his television debut on New Year's Day, 1990. The character's near-total silence, ironically, was exactly what allowed him to travel. Without reliance on language or cultural context, Mr. Bean became one of the most universally recognizable comic figures in the world, translated effortlessly across countries and languages that had nothing else in common. But Atkinson has been candid about how demanding the role actually was. With almost no dialogue to lean on, every ounce of comedy had to come from his face and body, pushed to physical extremes take after take. He has admitted in interviews, including a notably honest appearance on The Graham Norton Show, that filming Mr. Bean left him emotionally and physically drained, and that he frequently felt he wasn't meeting his own standard, despite the character's enormous success. The 1997 feature film adaptation became a massive commercial hit, and an animated series launched in the early 2000s gave Atkinson a way to keep the character alive through voice work alone, a far less punishing process than the physical performance the live-action version demanded. His final major live appearance as Mr. Bean came during the London 2012 Olympics opening ceremony, in a sketch that became one of the most talked-about moments of the night. Many now regard it as the character's unofficial farewell, a last, exhausting curtain call for a role that had given Atkinson worldwide fame and, by his own admission, very little peace. Away from comedy, Atkinson's personal life has had its share of upheaval. He met makeup artist Sunetra Sastry while working on Blackadder in the late 1980s, and the two married in 1990, going on to have 2 children together. After nearly a quarter of a century of marriage, the couple separated in 2014 and divorced the following year. Atkinson later began a relationship with actress Louise Ford, and the couple welcomed a daughter in 2017, making Atkinson a father again in his 60s. He has also had moments of real-life drama that had nothing to do with performance. In 2001, while flying over Kenya, the private pilot of his aircraft lost consciousness mid-flight. Atkinson, who had no formal flying training, took the controls and kept the plane steady until the pilot recovered enough to land safely. A genuinely dramatic episode that stands in sharp contrast to the chaos he portrays on screen. Atkinson has never shied away from controversy either. In 2012, he delivered a widely shared speech defending free expression, arguing that the threshold for what counts as offensive speech had grown too broad. More recently, in 2023, he wrote a newspaper opinion piece questioning the environmental credentials of electric vehicles, a stance that drew sharp criticism from scientists and environmental commentators, particularly given Atkinson's own long-standing hobby of collecting and restoring classic and high-performance cars. Atkinson turned 70 in January 2025, a milestone that prompted a wave of retrospectives celebrating a career built on faces rather than words. Across 5 decades, his work has earned him major honors, including BAFTA awards, an international Emmy, and recognition as one of the most versatile comic performers Britain has produced, a legacy that spans satire, period comedy, family films, and a nearly wordless character who somehow became understood everywhere on Earth. What makes his story compelling isn't just the scale of that success, but the tension underneath it. A boy who couldn't get a sentence out without stumbling grew up to entertain hundreds of millions of people through characters who barely spoke at all. The stutter that once made him a target for mockery became, in its own strange way, the seed of his greatest gift, an ability to communicate entirely through expression, timing, and physical instinct, when words simply wouldn't come. Atkinson has said more than once that he still feels he has something to prove, that the anxiety and self-doubt which shaped his childhood never fully disappeared, even after decades of acclaim. For the audiences who grew up watching Mr. Bean puzzle his way through everyday life, that admission adds a layer they never expected. The character that made the world laugh was built, in part, out of a very private struggle, one that Rowan Atkinson carried quietly, long before anyone knew his name.